He says, again, a new commandment I write to you, which things is true in him and in you. He who says he is in the light and hates his brother is in darkness until now. That is the third new commandment of basically the same thing. What was so new about this commandment? At this point in time, see what he says. Which things is true in him and where? In you. The spirit of the Messiah who was given to you at the creation of the body of the Messiah lives now in you. And he helps us to exemplify these beautiful laws. And I want to tell you, the bar is very high for the one who professes that Yeshua is his Messiah. So we have the written commandment. Then we have the same commandment exemplified in the life of the Messiah. But now we have this commandment living in us, if, of course, we know him. So these laws we are looking at today should really be part of our new nature that the Lord has imparted in us. And so today, more than our ancestors, we have a great responsibility towards those that are around us. Much more is given to us. So we cannot possibly be lukewarm and indifferent to the others. It's against the law of the Messiah. Let's now go back to Deuteronomy, where we further learn that these laws were not only for our friendly neighbors, but also for those towards whom we might have developed some kind of hard feelings. I want to ask you a question. Suppose that someone stole money from you, and he never wanted to give it back to you. In fact, he doesn't even return your calls. And one day, you find his wallet. And this wallet contains a good amount of money, maybe not quite what you were looking for, but a good, satisfactory chunk of money. Would you give it back to him? Or would you keep it, maybe thinking that God vindicated you? Okay, let's see what the law says. See Deuteronomy 22:4. It says, you shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down along the road, or hide yourself from them. You shall surely help him lift them up again. Here are two important principles. Help your brother, whoever your brother is. And the second principle, God says, vengeance is mine. Right? Your faith should be in God, who is your great provider. And one should give back this wallet to whoever it belongs. And who is your brother, by the way? He is the one you love, and he is the other one that you must love. We tend to be nice to those whom we like, and we tend to be mean to those we grew to dislike. This is not proper to a believer. It is again against the law. We should not divide the body of the Messiah into those we like and those we do not like. Our love and help should be extended to everyone. If you're not sure that your brother is your neighbor, or if he's your friend or your enemy, this question is dealt with by the Messiah himself. He answered this question in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Do you remember in Luke 10? This parable is in answer to a question someone who supposedly knew the law well asked Jesus, and he asked him, he says, and who is my neighbor? To him, Jesus answered with a very simple parable of a man who was left dead by some thieves. But as guilty as these thieves were, we read of others who saw this man in dire need and did not do anything for him. Remember Luke? Let's go to Luke 10:31-32. I have it on the screen for you. See what it says? It says, now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at this place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. Priests, Levites, those in our society, in this society, who should give the first example. But these were as guilty as the thieves in not helping the wounded man. But who helps him, by the way? It's a Samaritan. The one who was considered the lowest in the Israeli society. A great animosity existed between the Samaritan and the Jews. A Samaritan will be the last person one will think of getting help from or helping. Yet in this parable, the enemy helps, while the priests, the Levite, professional religious workers do not help at all. And at the end of the parable, Jesus asked a question in verse 36. It says, so which of these three do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? Verse 37, and he said, he who showed mercy to him. Then Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. Our neighbors then is not only those that we love, it includes those that we must love. And so we must treat them all equally. In our passage today, there are some very interesting laws also concerning the order of things. You know, we live in a world where things can degenerate quite rapidly. And these laws in our Bible help us to follow a straight line, to put first things first. Let's go to Deuteronomy 22:5. It says, a woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord our God. See verse 9 to 11. You shall not sow your vineyard with different kinds of seed, lest the yield of the seed which you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear a garment of different sorts, such as the wool and linen mixed together. There's an order in this life. And I believe that the intent of this law was to prepare the believer to understand also sanctification, to understand also that he is in a world that is not his, and that there's another world. It would prepare the believer to have a pure, distinctive life from the immoral and lawlessness behavior of the world. This law drove the truth of spiritual separation into the Israelites' mind and heart through everything they did. God wanted his people separated, sanctified, set apart. So when the Messiah came, they would say, hey, that's the one. That's the one I was trying to be like. They were actually trying to put on the Messiah, like Paul says. Let's look at these laws more closely. It says, a woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment. How shall we understand this law? You know, today some may argue that this law is outdated since many types of clothing are shared both by men and women. But the idea behind this is that of respecting the social laws and standard we live under. These may change with time, but there always be some standard we ought to live by and respect. And the believer is under these laws. It all amounts to respecting our neighbors. We have the same thing in the law of Christ. Remember in 1 Corinthians 11:14, what Paul says. Does not even nature itself teach that a man who has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? You know that the main issue here is not the hair. Because in the Bible, people had long hair. It wasn't a bad thing, right? But the conformity, the issue is that the conformity of the social laws of the time, with respect of your neighbors and social values. There is nothing inherently wrong in having long hair. This is determined by the laws of the society, and we ought to live by them. And the greatest example is, of course, Yeshua. Remember in Luke 2:52, great word says, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. The word favor speaks of grace. He speaks of sweetness, of loveliness, and in respect. That is what these laws call for. Again, to be like the Messiah, Jesus conformed himself to the social values and respected everyone, of course, as long as it doesn't go against the word of God. And he was keeping a life of spiritual separation at the same time. That is a great example for us to follow. This, I believe, is the intent of these laws, sanctification, and at the same time, full respect of the place we live in. And the other laws, not mixing seeds or different material in the garment or using two different animals to plow, bring the subject to respect the difference and distinctiveness in nature as well. And all this was to train the future evangelists not to mix truth, of course, and error, to avoid mixing the mixture of morality in immorality, of obedience and disobedience. And these laws end with a command. A command in this section of Deuteronomy, one that brings in the spiritual emphasis of these laws. Look at Deuteronomy 22:12, one about tassels. Look what it says. It says, "You shall make tassels on the four corners of the clothing with which you cover yourself." Here is another law we might think do not concern us, but there's a great spiritual truth in this commandment. What are tassels, by the way? You have it in the screen. You know, tassels in Hebrew mean twisted threads. Okay, so the religious Jews, the Jews at that time would wear this. Jesus wore these things. And the reason is given in Numbers 15. Starting in verse 38, it says, "Speak to the children of Israel, tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners. And you shall have the tassels that you may look upon it," and look what it says, "to remember all the commandments of the Lord and to do them, and that you may not follow the harlotry to which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined." And verse 40 says that you may remember and do all my commandments and be holy, for your God is holy. You know, the object of the tassels was to remind the Israelites of the law of God, of the presence of God, and of the holiness of God while we are journeying in this life. They were physical reminder of God's law. It is significant that these tassels were also blue. Why blue? You know, to remind the Israelites that there's a blue sky up there. Sometimes we get so absorbed with things in this life that we need to be reminded of an eternal abode, right? Of our next life with the Messiah. Again, that was the fundamental truth behind the people, believers in the Old Testament, as we see it in Hebrews 11. Today we do not have to wear tassels, but we have a much higher reminder. We have the Spirit of God dwelling in us and always reminding us of the things we do right or we do wrong, and leading us into higher and higher sanctification, day by day, hour by hour. It is this Spirit of God that teaches us about God and about the Father, as we read in 1 Corinthians 2:11. I'll read it for you. It says, "For what man knows the things of a man except the spirit of man which is in him? Even so no one knows the things of God except the Spirit of God that dwells in you." So here Paul tells us that we cannot know the thoughts of man or the thoughts of God. The Spirit is our link. He's our link to our neighbors. He's our link to God. And among the many laws given are also those that deal with money. Money that we owe, money that is stolen. They say that money is the root of all evil. Is this true? No. Good. There's nothing wrong with money, really, you know, but what we make of it. The Bible says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And this wrong love of money often brings people to lose their sense of justice, their sense of what is right and what is wrong. The law speaks, by the way, much about it. See Deuteronomy 24:15, just one of them. It speaks of one facet of this truth, and there's a lot in there. 24:15. It says, "Each day you shall give him," that is your worker, "his wages, and not let the sun go down on it, for he is poor and has set his heart on it, lest he cry out against you to the Lord, and it be sin to you." The law is very concerned with paying what we owe, especially wages to the workers. God listens to the cry and the complaints of those that are abused and deprived of their belongings. And the principle of this law is not only for the employers, but is also for the employees, because they can abuse the employers. This is what we see in Titus 2, 9-10. This one is for the employees who abuse the employer. He says, "Exhort workers to be obedient to their masters, to be well-pleasing in all things, not answering back, not pilfering." What does that mean, pilfering?